Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we've got another, the third this time, of the 2023 Schleich line, and this is one that I think many people were actually quite excited about, as we've got ourselves a Gallimimus, and that's not something you get often when it comes to dinosaur producing companies. That is a species that, in my opinion, is severely overlooked, except for, of course, in the Jurassic World line. But when it comes to attempting to make more accurate interpretations of this dinosaur, we don't get very many. So it was pretty exciting to have Schleich creating one. And one thing you might notice straight away when it comes to me having my hand here in the screen is that this is actually quite big, much larger than I was expecting it to be. I don't know why I thought it would be smaller, but I definitely expected it to be significantly smaller than it is. So that is actually really cool that it's quite large overall, because it gives us a decent sized interpretation of a Gallimimus, and overall it's a pretty nice figure. I wouldn't say it's the best figure for sure of the year, and there are a few things that I'm not a super huge fan about when it comes to this species. As far as accuracy goes, I mean, I'm not positive how accurate it is because I am not a professional when it comes to Gallimimus. It's just not a species that I've ever been super interested in, so I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but I can tell you it's a pretty nice looking figure. I do like the paint scheme that they've come up with. The color scheme and everything that they chose for the figure is quite nice. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight to a closer look at this right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt of the Gallimimus, I think it looks pretty nice, honestly. They've definitely sculpted out some really nice detailing throughout the head sculpt of our dinosaur. You can also see the nostrils are sculpted out. We have a nice yellowish tone that transitions, if my camera would stay focused, transitions very smoothly back to a grayish tone as we reach the feathering of our Gallimimus. You can see it also transitions to actually like a lighter gray before transitioning again to a darker gray, which looks pretty nice. The mouth overall is sculpted quite nicely, and we also seem to have kind of like a dark brownish wash that's been applied to highlight the detail quite nicely in that area. As you move back into the face here a little bit further, or actually the head I should say a little bit further, you can see the eye is painted very nicely with a nice glossy black. It's only a black, there's nothing else in there, but it looks really good and definitely very lifelike. As you start to reach the feather detail, something we don't get very often, are feathered dinosaurs from Schleich, so I'm pretty excited to actually take a look at the feathers. You can see they look pretty nice, but they're not super impressive. However, they're honestly like kind of what I would expect for a dinosaur like this, a species like this, as we have kind of shaggier feathers, almost emu-like feathering, so that's kind of what I would expect when it comes to this species. And they've done a pretty good job of bringing out certain areas of the feathering in kind of like a scruffier sort of a way to sort of just give some difference to the feathers and just show that kind of erratic appearance to them like you would see on an emu and like I assume you would potentially see on a Gallimimus. I also like that they've added in this nice reddish tone that runs down the course of the throat of the dinosaur. You can see it runs all the way down before transitioning away as we reach down here close to the chest. We also have some of those reds showing up here on the arms, which is pretty cool. Again, really subtle areas of coloration that I think just add a nice element of flashiness to the dinosaur. The feathering, though, you can see looks kind of the same as you move through the course of the figure, but that doesn't mean that it's bad by any means. It still looks pretty nice overall. The one thing, though, that I can say I would have liked to have seen on this would have maybe been, I mean, I don't know how good it would have looked, but maybe like an area of dry brushing throughout to sort of highlight the feathers. Because although they've done a good job of adding in some slight subtle differences in coloration throughout the feathering here on the back, you can see that there's darker tones that transition to kind of lighter tones of gray. So it does look okay as far as that goes, but I feel like the feathers themselves, because they don't have any type of paintwork to sort of differentiate them from each other, all kind of blend together and they just look a little flat as far as the realism aspect goes. But again, the way that they're sculpted, I don't know that a dry brushing or anything like that would have worked to really highlight the detail any more than it already has. Maybe a dark wash, actually, because there is a lot of kind of like cracks and crevices here included in the sculpting of the feathers, so maybe a dark wash crawling in and out of there could have potentially helped, but even still, again, it doesn't look bad, it just doesn't look super lifelike. As you move down into the arms of the Gallimimus, you can see that we actually have some really nice looking feathering here, really nice looking plumage as you move out here into the arms. It transitions to a nice lighter gray, and you can get a good idea as far as what Schleich's ability is to sculpt out feathers, and I think it looks pretty nice overall. Definitely has a very nice, very highly detailed appearance to it, and the transition out into those feathers is quite nice. You can see that the hands are sculpted in here, but they look very strange to me, if my camera would stay focused on them. The fingers are like kind of bent in and curved in, so it's almost hard to actually differentiate the fingers from the feathers. It just kind of looks like a big glob of something out here on the end of the hand. I think it's a little bit easier to take a look at it over here. You can definitely make out the nails and the fingers and the stuff over here a little nicer than what we see on this hand. So I think that could have been done a little bit better, but you can also see we have a nice lighter gray here on the underside of the feathers as well, which are equally as beautiful as far as the sculpt goes compared to what we see on the outer edge of the feathers on the outside. As you move back here toward the leg, you can start to make out the, kind of hip and the thigh protruding through the feathers as we move down into the leg. The leg obviously is taking a step forward as our Gallimimus is running along. And I do quite like the coloration that they've applied out here, as we have some nice lighter browns, but we also have darker browns, and they've applied a nice dark wash to it as a whole to really highlight all of the skin texture and scale detail out here on the feet. I feel like, though, that the scale detail here looks a little bit larger than I would expect for this species. It just doesn't look correct to me. It doesn't look like the type of skin texture or scale detail or something like that I would expect to see on a Gallimimus. So that area, in my opinion, looks a little off. But again, I did state earlier, I'm no professional when it comes to Gallimimus. I'm no paleontologist, and I don't know all that much about the species. At least I don't know enough to really comment on accuracy on this dinosaur, so I can't say for sure if that's how it would have looked or not, but to me it looks off. And the foot sculpt as well is okay, but it doesn't look bird-like enough to me to really be, again, an accurate looking Gallimimus foot sculpt. And those toes are really, really short. The nails are painted with a nice glossy black, but the foot sculpt as well, again, looks a little off as far as what I would expect for a Gallimimus. But the dark wash has done a great job of really highlighting all of the detail throughout the leg and foot. It also highlights the detail quite nicely here on the underside of the figure as well. As we lead out here into the tail, though, you start to see the feathers kind of overtake the tail yet again, and we return entirely to that darker grayish tone for both the upper side and underside of the figure. As you lead out, you again have that same style of feathering with that kind of emu-like scruffy feathering, and again you have some nice tail feathers out here at the end, but there's not like a massive area of tail feathers, just a small little display of feathers out here that have, again, that same similar style of sculpt as what we see through the rest of the figure. And then over here on the opposing side, you can again see the head sculpt looks pretty nice, very nicely painted. I definitely like the head sculpt, and I like the paint on the eye. The eye really is quite lifelike. But as you move back down, you again have pretty much the same style, of course, as far as the sculpt and paintwork. No real big difference. You're not going to see a massive difference as far as the appearance to the figure, because you can see a slight turn in the head as the dinosaur is running along, but it's not any kind of like a massive difference compared to the initial side. As you move down, you can see that the arm on this side is in a slightly different position compared to what we see on the opposing side. You can see the same style of sculpt, of course, though, and again, that nice little area of that red right there. You can really pick out the finger again really nicely on this side compared to the initial side, but you can also see the feather detail here in the arms also looks nice over here, and you can see what it looks like on the underside of the opposing arm now on this side. And you can also see feather detail here running through the underside, through the chest and stomach region of our Gallimimus. But again, you can see that this side we have the leg leaning back much further, again showing the really quick movement of our Gallimimus, which helps to give us a little bit of a better look here at the stomach region and the way that the feathers are again sculpted out throughout. And then as you lead back, you again have the detailing of the legs that I'm really not a big fan of. And in fact, the more I look at it, the less I like it, because I just don't like the way that they've sculpted out the scaling. I just don't think it looks very good. And the feet are just like this side specifically is really awful. Like that foot sculpt, the toes are just so short, and that foot sculpt just doesn't look very good as far as the fine detail goes. I feel like Schleich has numerous different sculptors, and sometimes they sculpt figures out really nicely, like we saw with the Tarbosaurus and the Gastonia, and then sometimes we get figures that are sculpted out a little bit awkwardly like we have with this Gallimimus. But again, you can see the nails are at least painted nicely, and as you move out here into the tail, you can again see the curvatures there of the tail overall. Even though it's a little bit weird looking, it's a little bit awkward looking, it's at least still pretty cool to have a nice feathered Gallimimus released by someone, because again, it is a figure, it is a species that is always overlooked when it comes to getting figures like this. So even though it's not the best one in the world, it's still pretty cool. As far as the size, again, I did state it is pretty sizable. You could obviously see that. You're looking at lengthwise around 8.5 inches or about 21.5 centimeters. And then height-wise to the top of the head, just shy of about 3 3/4 inches or around 9.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line next to our Schleich Gallimimus. And you can definitely see it has a pretty good, strong, medium size range for this one. Like, again, it's quite a bit bigger than I was expecting it to be, which was a pleasant surprise. But for another comparison, here is the Batat Gallimimus, because again, we don't have very many figures of this species out, so we at least have a Batat version, which is an absolutely beautiful, though outdated, but still a beautiful version of a Gallimimus. And you can definitely see there's a massive size difference between these two, as the Batat version is much, much smaller. For another comparison, here is a standard-sized Mattel Gallimimus to help give you an idea of the size. If you are a fan of the species, again, you might have one of the Mattel versions because there are so few figures out there of it, so this one I felt like would be a pretty good one for a comparison. I was going to bring in my Hammond collection Gallimimus, but I think it's just a little too buried currently, so that pulling that one out would be a bit of a nightmare. So I brought in the Collectae Struthiomimus, because even though it's not the exact same species, it's a very similar species. And again, you can see that the Gallimimus from Schleich absolutely destroys the Struthiomimus from Collectae as far as a size goes. For another comparison, and this is just a random one, just in case you are a collector of the Schleich line, you've got the Tyrannosaurus Rex here from Schleich next to the Gallimimus again. A very popular Schleich figure that I felt like would be a pretty good one to bring in for a comparison. And then for a final comparison and a few more randoms, we have the Schleich Diabloceratops, the Safari LTDU Tyrannus, and Collectae Deluxe Dimetrodon next to our Gallimimus from Schleich, again just to iron out the fact that it is a pretty decent size overall. So this brand new 2023 Gallimimus from Schleich is pretty decent. It's definitely got some issues. It's not the greatest figure I've ever seen, that's for sure, and I would definitely not say it is the best figure of the year for Schleich. Although I had high hopes for it at first when I had seen the images of it, because I was pretty excited in general to see a Gallimimus getting a release, but you know, some of the areas like the hands and the fingers and stuff, they don't look very good. The legs, as far as the actual texturing of the skin, to me doesn't look all that good. And although the feather detail looks pretty decent for what it is, I just feel like it could have potentially had a little bit more detail to it to make it look a little bit nicer. But that being said, that's pretty much the majority of the downsides that I could give the figure, because outside of that, it is still a pretty cool looking figure. It's a nice looking interpretation of a Gallimimus sculpt-wise past those areas that I've discussed, because we have, again, some nice feathering on the Gallimimus, and we don't get that very often when it comes to Gallimimus figures, because more often than not, we usually get Jurassic Park style versions, so it's nice to have one that is not a Jurassic Park version, and again, is more of a attempt at least at a more realistic version. But you can also see again that the pose for the Gallimimus, in my opinion, isn't the greatest. I'm not a huge fan of it being down on one arm as it's running, and it definitely needs that arm down to support the figure, otherwise it is absolutely not going to stand. I would have liked to have seen, even if it had to include a base, which I don't think I'll ever see Schleich do, I would have liked to have seen a more kind of upright running pose, although it kind of gives it the appearance of like maybe a Gallimimus fleeing from a predator, and it just kind of dropped down to one arm real quick as it was maybe trying to change direction or something like that, as we see the head kind of slightly turned, so it sort of makes it look like it's about to make a sharp left turn. So in a way, I guess when I consider that, I kind of do like the pose. It absolutely gives it, you know, some life and sort of tells a little bit of a story as far as the figure goes, so the more I think about it, the more I do kind of like the pose. I think it could have been better, but it still is pretty cool. The paint job is also quite nicely done. I like the coloration they've chosen for the figure. I think it looks nice and natural without being too flashy, but still adding in a little element of flashiness to the figure with the reds and stuff in the throat and on the arms, but the grays and stuff I think just work for the dinosaur, and it works very nicely. They've also applied the classic Schleich dark wash in a few areas, but I feel like if they would have applied it to the feathers, it probably would have made it look a little bit nicer. Maybe even if they had applied like a light gray wash to the feathers, it would have highlighted them quite nicely, I think. But still, again, this is probably the least appealing of the figures that I've reviewed so far for the 2023 Schleich line, and that's not that bad because even for being the least appealing, it's still a pretty decent figure. So if you are interested in picking this one up, I will include a link in the description to where you can do that on the Schleich website. So make sure you check that link, go grab this Gallimimus, and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.